When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject, Clay Reece. User, Mr. ISIP46. Posted, September 19th, 1996.
They say the Mississippi moves awful slow through the bend at Ripley, but that's a lie told by folks who only see it from a distance. You stand down by the water and you'll feel it in your chest, a heavy kind of pull that don't stop for nothing. The Reece family had land down there for generations, rich bottomland, good for cotton if you could keep it dry, and by the 90s, that land was all that was left of their fortune. Clay Reece worked it, same as his daddy and his granddaddy before him, sun up to sundown, his skin turned to leather, his voice worn thin as the laces on his boots. It was the summer of '95 when it happened. The kind of hot that makes the air taste like iron. The bugs were thick, the river low, and the ground cracked in places it had never cracked before. The cotton wilted fast under the sun that year, leaves curling tight like they were trying to hide from the light. The air buzzed with that strange, endless hum of heat. Clay was out fixing irrigation lines that ran from the pump station down through the rows when he caught a snake under the valve. Some say a copperhead, some say a moccasin. Whatever. He said he barely touched it, just a nick across the back of his hand. It didn't even bleed. He laughed about that part. Said the old stories about venom and swelling were just for folks who ain't no better. But by the next morning, he wasn't laughing anymore. The hand had gone stiff, the skin pale and dry like paper left in the sun. He wrapped it in a rag and kept on working. Figured it'd heal. That was Clay, too proud, too stubborn to take a break, too used to pain to think it meant anything worth stopping for. When I saw him a few days later, down by the gin barn, he looked worn out, hollowed somehow, like the sun had baked something out of him that wasn't coming back. The veins in his arms had gone dark, and he said it itched under the skin something fierce. He told me it felt like there were worms moving in there, like he could feel them shift when he flexed his fingers. He smiled when he said it, but it wasn't the kind of smile that reached the eyes. His shirt was damp with sweat, but when I shook his hand, his skin was cool, almost cold. Nobody saw much of him after that. He stopped coming into town. The cotton went to seed, and the pickers turned to rust. His mama said he was sick, but wouldn't see a doctor. Said he didn't want to waste money on a snake bite that didn't bleed. She told me his house smelled strange, like damp earth, and he kept the windows closed even when the heat broke. She said sometimes she could hear him pacing at night, floorboards creaking steady as a metronome until just before dawn. When I finally drove out to check on him, the air around his house felt thick, heavy, like The storm about to break, but never quite coming. The fields were half dead, white tufts of cotton hanging limp like they'd grown tired of reaching for the sun. I called his name from the yard and got no answer. The dogs wouldn't come near the porch, just whined low with their ears back. Through the screen door, I saw him sitting by the window, shirtless, staring out toward the river like he was waiting on something that had already come and gone. His skin looked different. It wasn't color anymore, it was texture. Gray, cracked, and shiny in places, like scales catching the light when he moved. His hair had gone flat and thin, his face drawn and tight as if his bones were pulling inward. The way he sat, still, upright, too still, made me feel like if I blinked, he might start to sway like a snake before it strikes. His eyes followed me when I stepped onto the porch, but they didn't move quite right. Too slow and deliberate. I saw something pass across them. A reflection, maybe, but it felt alive. He didn't say a word, just stared at me through the screen, and for a second, I thought he was breathing with the rhythm of the river behind him, long and deep, like the two had learned to share a single pulse. I stood there till my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, then turned and walked back to the truck without looking over my shoulder. A few weeks later, the river rose. It always does that time of year, but that summer it came higher than it had in a long while. It rained for days. Thick, warm rain that smelled like the bottom of a well. The Reece land flooded first, that low country where the fields met the cypress grove. Folks said the water climbed faster around his place than anywhere else, like the river wanted it back. By the time the current calmed, the house was gone. No boards, no foundation, and no trace of a man who'd lived there his whole life. They said the current took it. The county wrote it off as erosion, part of the bend collapsing, but folks who lived near the levee said the water stayed back for days after, thick with something that looked like oil but shimmered in the sun like scales. When the Corps came to dredge the channel, they pulled up piles of snakes, tangled in the roots, hundreds of them, all dead, twisted together like ropes. Some of them were swollen to the size of a man's arm, and one of the workers swore he saw human fingernails still embedded in the flesh. Well, that was the end of the Reece family. No heirs, no land, no trace but a patch of wild cotton that still grows crooked on that bend, blooming even when nothing else will. And yet, folks around Ripley say that field hums on certain nights. They say if you stand out there at dusk, the air feels colder and you can hear something rustling low, the sound of scales brushing dry stalks. Some nights, when the river's quiet and the moon's sitting low, you can hear the frogs go silent all at once, like something heavy's sliding through the water. Folks say it's just the current, but I've lived long enough to know better. The Mississippi doesn't take without keeping. Whatever bit Clay that day didn't just stop his blood, it changed it. And if you're ever down near that bend when the air turns cold in August, don't linger, don't go wading, don't go throw rocks, and for God's sakes, don't go touch the water, because every so often, when the floodlight from the bridge hits just right, you can see a shape moving below the surface, long and gray, slow as a breath, with the faintest glint of eyes that used to be a man's. They'll tell you it's a log, or debris, or shadow. But those of us who remember Clay Reece know better. Some things the river don't wash clean. Some things just sink down deep and wait.
Subject, long haul. User, free18WHL. Posted, May 24, 1997.
My dad once met Jimmy Hoffa at a Teamsters rally, and he used to say that after having us, it was the second proudest moment of his life. What Hoffa said, if you got it, a truck brought it, made him feel good about driving a truck for a living, even if it wasn't always easy. He'd been driving rigs his entire life, and it had paid him enough to feed us and put a roof over our heads, but it also kept him away from home for days at a time. He had to miss our ball games, marching band performances, all that little stuff that adds up over a lifetime, and while he'd never say it, I believe trucking cost him his marriage with Mom, too, who left him for a handyman when I was just about old enough to start looking after my brothers and sisters. I tried to be other things, I really did, but Dad used to say that God makes farmers and fishermen, and I'm no farmer. My fondest memories from childhood were of being around his truck, having the smell of diesel burn my nostrils and bristle my tongue, and once I became den mother to my siblings, I knew there was no other way for me but the open road. I've been driving for 20 years now, and let me tell you, I have seen some sights. Sitting high up in the cab of a rig, you have a view of the world that the four-wheelers on the road just don't. When you're coming down a hill late at night and your headlights are turning a frosted-up apple tree into a kind of redneck disco ball, that's a good thing. When you wake up at night and hear someone talking to you, but you can plainly see there isn't a soul for a mile around, you're less excited about having the big chair. This story comes from an overnight at the Segovia stop on I-10, just east of Junction, Texas. I'd rolled in around 10:30, maybe half hour before the diner closed up, and had myself a chicken fried steak with gravy. I know, it's not good for you, but what is these days? My belly full, I climbed back into the sleeper in my cab for a little shut-eye. After my mom left, Dad knew that us boys would go crazy if we had too much downtime, so he found us some work with a furniture hauling company, doing grease and oil changes on their tractor trailers. We didn't have compressed air grease guns back then. Instead, we had to load them by hand, and it could be messy as hell. The differential oil, in particular, had a terrible sulfurous smell that stuck to you, and that night in the Segovia lot, I dreamed we were back in that truck depot, our hands covered in the stuff. In the dream, it was a hot summer's day, and somewhere in the distance I could hear a dog barking. The sulfur fumes were overpowering, and I started to feel lightheaded. I looked up toward my brother to see if he'd maybe spilled the can or something, and he was gone. The barking sound got louder as if the dog was getting closer. My dream self walked around the depot, which had emptied out at some point, the drivers and mechanics gone wherever my brother had, I supposed. The oil smell had increased to the point where it overwhelmed me completely, and I tried walking outside to the fresh air, but it stayed in my nostrils. Outside was just as empty as inside. The only sound was the barking, which was not distant anymore. Rather, it seemed to be coming from right around the corner of the truck farm, a crazy, gargling bark that didn't sound like any dog I knew. Despite myself, I began creeping toward the sound, curious to see if I could catch a glimpse of the dog without attracting its attention. In the silence of the yard, my boot crunching into gravel was particularly gunshot loud, and the dog responded in kind, its frenzied barking reaching new heights. Whatever it was that rounded the corner was no dog. It was pointed and bony and moved with terrifying speed. When I dropped out of the dream, I felt relief at being safe back in my sleeper. That relief was short-lived, however, because I could still smell that sulfur funk and hear barking. Gently, I parted the curtain, separating my sleeper from the cab, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Crouched on top of my engine, staring in through the windshield and barking like crazy, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, and he was wearing what looked like something Robin Hood would wear. I guess you'd call it a tunic, hanging way down over his knees. His face was filthy, covered in smears of brown and black, and his eyes were wild. They looked like slits, more snake than human. The whole image was so unlikely, so completely insane that I didn't know what to do. The boy wasn't hitting the windshield or anything, just barking. I parted the curtain more and he saw me, his barks giving way to a kind of high-pitched squeal. I've nearly died driving a truck 6 or 7 times over the course of my career, but this was the only time I came close to messing myself. My head was still spinning from the sulfur smell and the unreality of the whole situation, but I gripped the front seat tight and pulled myself up, sitting down behind the wheel. The boy was still crouched in the same position, but now he was looking up toward the night sky, squealing in bursts. With his head up, I got a good look at the rest of him, his neck, his legs, his arms, and they were practically skeletal. They were so skinny. Being that we were on our own lot as kids, I'm tender on the subject of other kids being left in similar circumstances, but that night I didn't feel any sympathy for the boy on my hood. No, sir, I felt a revulsion like a fat, black cockroach had just crawled out of my spaghetti. I wanted to get gone, and now. I tapped on the windshield, and the boy's head snapped towards me, his eyes sparkling. I told him he had to go, that I was going to drive off with him on the hood if he kept on, and all he did was give me this little smile that made my guts twist up. I shifted the truck into gear, and it shuddered, making the kid lose his balance a little. He looked around quickly, almost animal-like, then dropped onto all fours and leapt off the hood to the passenger side. I couldn't see him anymore, but the barking was still there to keep me aware of his presence. Also, without him on the hood, I was able to get a good look at the truck stop parking lot, and it was almost full, but somehow none of this had attracted the attention of a single driver. I pushed the accelerator down further, heading toward the highway. In my passenger side mirror, I saw the bony boy again, still on all fours and barking. He was following me. The speedometer crept up and up as I got closer to the on-ramp, but still, that child kept pace, his bare hands and feet biting into the road dust and propelling him forward, barking all the while. I got up to 50 and he was still there, which shouldn't have been possible. His stick-like limbs were moving so fast they made him look like some kind of awful horse. Then, once my wheels hit the on-ramp, he just disappeared, like mist and sunrise. As I merged onto the interstate and brought the truck up to 60, it occurred to me that the sulfur smell was gone too. The miles dropped away, and before long, I started wondering if the whole thing hadn't been a nightmare. But a real good look at the hood stopped that right quick. There, just ahead of the vents below my windshield, was a muddy set of prints. 2 feet and 2 hands, like they'd been left intentionally. I don't know what I saw that night, but I do know that the smell of differential oil will never hit me the same way again.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.